Hi, I'm Dr. Leah Jacob, and welcome to my webinar, Why Reading Food Labels is Unlikely to Help You Reduce Your Sugar Intake. And before I begin, I'd like to thank Professor Amanda Avery and the School of Biosciences at the University of Nottingham for all their help and support in the preparation of this webinar. So this webinar aims to understand the difficulties that consumers are facing in following healthy eating guidelines based on the information provided by government policy and on food labelling. We'll then discuss the definition of sugars and carbohydrates, a review of international recommendations, a summary of current adult intake, and then we'll explore food labelling, the NOVA food classification, and the concept of hormonal carbohydrates. And finally, we'll look at the question of how do we get healthy? The debate about sugar is not new. In 1972, John Yudkin first described the hidden dangers of sugar in his book, Pure, White and Deadly. He believed that increasing levels of coronary artery disease and other non-communicable diseases were being caused by excess sugar consumption. But the prevailing belief at the time was that a low-fat diet may prevent heart disease, and this became the ideology. And as we strive to make low-fat diets accessible, food manufacturers started replacing fat in these low-fat products with sugar. So now I'll run through some definitions that we'll be referring to in the webinar. Firstly, carbohydrates, compounds composed of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen, arranged as monosaccharides or multiples of monosaccharides. And most, but not all, carbohydrates have the formula CH2ON. Sugars, they're simple carbohydrates consisting of monosaccharides, glucose, fructose, and galactose, and disaccharides, maltose, sucrose, and lactose. Starch, a plant polysaccharide composed of many glucose molecules. Total sugars, both endogenous sugars, those naturally present in foods such as fruit, vegetables, cereals, and lactose in milk, and the added sugars. And the added sugars are sugars added to food during processing or preparation, including honey and naturally occurring sugars that are isolated from a whole food and concentrated, resulting in the primary component being sugar, so things such as fruit juice concentrates. But they exclude the naturally occurring sugars present in intact fruit and vegetables, dairy products, or in juiced fruit and pureed vegetables. So free sugars are all monosaccharides and disaccharides added to the food by the manufacturer, cook, or consumer, plus sugars naturally present in honey, syrups, and unsweetened fruit juices. Under this definition, lactose, when naturally present in milk products, is excluded. Then the concept of hormonal carbohydrates. So this is the total carbohydrate level in a serving minus the fiber and protein content. So no, it's in a serving, not per 100 grams. Then the glycemic index, a method of classifying foods according to the difference in blood glucose response after consuming the same amount of carbohydrate. So there's a range from 0 to 100, with glucose being given the value of 100. And foods can be classified as high, medium, and low. And then the glycemic load. So it's a glycemic index times the amount of carbohydrate in the food divided by 100. So the glycemic load accounts for the portion size of the food consumed. And again, the foods can be classified as high, medium, and low. And just note the complexity of some of these definitions. I have to remind myself regularly between the differences in some of them. So for the purposes of this presentation, safe levels of sugar will be defined as those that don't lead to adverse events in the population. And we'll use the same outcomes as used in the SACN report, the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition report, in the section on sugar and sugar-sweetened beverages. So these were coronary events, energy intake, type 2 diabetes, oral and colorectal health. And as increased energy intake is consistently associated with increased body weight, this outcome was also included from other reports. If you look at the first line of the table, the general recommendation from the analysed guidelines is to aim for an added or free sugar intake of 5 to 7% of total energy intake. The SACN guidelines and WHO refer to free sugars, whereas the American DGAC and AHA guidelines look at added sugars. Free sugars also include the sugars in pureed and juiced fruits and vegetables. Therefore, the SACN and WHO guidelines are stricter than the American DGAC and AHA guidelines. I've highlighted in bold where there is evidence of an association. And you can see that for coronary events, the second line down, there is evidence of raised triglycerides, but little else. There's evidence of increased energy intake and body weight, but particularly with soft drinks. For type 2 diabetes, the association was only found for sugar-sweetened beverages. There was no association, or it wasn't assessed, for colon cancer, and there was moderate association with dental caries in the two guidelines that assessed it. This graph shows international data for added sugars. It's clear that even if we use a generous guideline of the DGAC of less than 6% added sugar in comparison to the less than 5% of free sugar in the second guideline, most Western adult populations are consuming far in excess of these levels. The UK has the highest level of added sugar intake in Western Europe, and the USA has over double the DGAC recommendation. So moving on to food labelling. The traffic light label system at the front of package uses total sugars. You can see it here on this red packet of crisps at the top. And the total sugar in this bag of crisps comes up as less than 1%, so green. Total sugars are only weakly correlated with a negative impact on health. And it's in fact free sugars that have the most consistent association with weight gain, type 2 diabetes, and dental caries. Free sugar levels aren't reported on food labelling. And if you look at here, the white label, that's a back of package food label, and that reports levels of carbohydrate and total sugars. So we're advised to reduce our free or added sugar intake, but the packaging gives us total sugar intakes. The disconnection between food labelling and dietary guidance results in a real challenge in understanding the sugar content of food. It is extremely difficult for consumers to make an informed choice. And the ingredients list here that you can see at the bottom gives may list sugars, but under a multitude of different names with no quantification. Ingredients higher in the list will have a larger quantity, but consumers are still left guessing whether the product has an acceptable level of added or free sugar. There is a lack of accepted analytical methods to measure added or free sugar levels in food. And this is more complex for free sugars, where processes such as chopping, sieving, and cooking will leave sugars on a continuum between being intact within their original food source and clearly free. A systematic methodology to estimate added sugar content involving 10 complex steps has been published by Louis et al. In 2014. It involves 6 objective steps, including classification based on food type, calculations based on a standard recipe, and 4 subjective steps, including comparison with similar products and estimates based on available information. Calculating levels of free sugars are nigh on impossible for the average person. Free sugars have been demonized over refined carbohydrates. But rapidly absorbed carbohydrates may be present in both sugars and starches, and it's the rapid absorption that leads to a spike in the glycemic response and increases the postprandial insulin response. Carbohydrates have been associated with the obesity epidemic and the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Foods and diets with a high refined carbohydrate content have a higher glycemic index and a higher glycemic load, which have also been associated with an increased incidence of cardiovascular disease. There have been conflicting results for the association between low GI and GL diets and weight loss and cancer risk. Meta-analysis have shown significantly decreased levels of glycated hemoglobin, so glucose control, with a low GL and GI diet in those with type 2 diabetes. But there was no effect of a low GI diet on a pregnancy outcome in women with gestational diabetes. Irrespective of the evidence, there's actually difficulty translating the concept of glycemic index and glycemic load into practice. Several issues such as the validity and reproducibility of the GI levels, the differences when foods are eaten as a single item versus a mixed meal, are all factors affecting the glycemic response. Protein and fiber content can particularly influence the glycemic response with foods containing either protein or fiber, reducing the postprandial blood sugar spike. Estimating the glycemic levels of food to be eaten involves needing to know the glycemic index of the food and the amount of carbohydrate present in a portion. The glycemic index may be unknown, or in mixed foods, the calculation may be particularly complex. Another way to assess food is the level of processing. Ultra-processed foods have been associated with increased risk of all-cause mortality, overweight, and obesity. The NOVA classification divides foods into Group 1, unprocessed or minimally processed, Group 2, processed culinary ingredients, 3, processed foods, and Group 4, ultra-processed foods. The labelling system has been incorporated into the Dietary Guidelines and Goals for Brazil and Canada. Tater and Tater proposed an alternative hormonal carbohydrate level as being key in influencing the glycemic response to carbohydrates. The hormonal carbohydrate level involves taking the total carbohydrate level in a portion in the serving and then subtracting the fiber and protein content. And they suggest that everyone should avoid foods with a level over 15 grams, and certain people, according to a scoring of metabolism that they devised, should aim for below 10 and others below 5 grams. This table has taken 6 common foods and used a traffic light system compared with a hormonal carbohydrate level using nutritional information from a UK supermarket website. For the hormonal carbohydrates, levels over 15 grams have been labelled as red, those over 5 grams as amber, and those less than 5 grams as green, for a comparison with the traffic light system. Although this concept lacks an evidence base, the ease of calculation from the available information on food labelling is attractive. And according to the traffic light system, a portion of cooked oven chips would be low in sugar. However, they'd be categorised as high GI and high GL. The hormonal carbohydrate of 24.8 grams per serving seems more reflective of the potential postprandial effect on blood glucose levels. A portion of cornflakes or one slice of white bread may also cause a blood glucose spike, and the hormonal carbohydrate levels of over 10 grams again seems more reflective of that than the levels of sugar according to the traffic light system, which you can see here are 3% and 2%. I tried to document the glycemic load of each food item, but it was difficult to find the glycemic index of many of the products. The portion sizes with glycemic load varied in published tables, and making the calculation very complex. The banana, which is the most natural product, has a NOVA score of 1, but a high hormonal carbohydrate level, which is congruent with a sugar spike that you'd expect after eating it. The combination of NOVA with hormonal carbohydrate provides 2 dimensions with which to assess the healthfulness of food: processing and glycemic effect. This is a potentially simple and insightful combination. Consumption of sugar-sweetened drinks is associated with a greater incidence of type 2 diabetes and increased risk of weight gain and obesity. They're also associated with dental caries and erosions. Many policy documents use evidence from the effect of sugar-sweetened drinks to guide policy on free or added sugar. But we can't assume the same effect of sugar-sweetened drinks as sugar-sweetened foods. We can't assume the effect of all sugars is the same, irrespective of whether we're eating them or drinking them. There's little evidence about whether the form of added or free sugars in drinks or food affects its potential to increase weight gain. Non-milk-based sugar-sweetened drinks have no protein or fibre, and thus are high in their GI and GL value. If free or added sugars are too complex to measure, and total sugars are not reflective of the glycemic effect of food, making policy about the recommended level of intake of free or added sugars is illogical. Consumers are further challenged by the gap between the recommendations and food labelling. Confusing policy may actually disengage people from making healthy choices. Questioning the safe level of free or added sugars may actually be the wrong question. The problem is more basic. How do we encourage the population to have a healthier diet? Consumers are more confused than ever about what they should be eating. Demonizing one macronutrient is not leading to an improvement in population nutrition. The demonizing of fat in the 80s led to an increase in sugar in the diet. Restricting sugar could lead consumers to increase their intake of saturated fat or reduce their fibre intake. Restricting sugar intake doesn't mean that consumers will automatically increase their intake of vegetables, fruits, and whole grain cereals. It feels like we're playing a game of whack-a-mole. We try and suppress one macronutrient in the diet, leading to another being ingested in excess, and not necessarily improving the overall quality of the diet. The message to reduce free sugars could actually make it more desirable. It's been suggested that 95% of our cognition occurs in the subconscious, and thought suppression has been found to have a paradoxical effect for self-control. So, meaning that if you're trying to not think about something, you may actually think of it more. I want you to try it and not think of a pink elephant. Is it possible? And now try and think of not having added sugar. Is there any difference? Consumers are dealing with the same conundrum if instructions are given in the negative. If thought suppression has a paradoxical effect, if the subconscious cannot think in the negative, demonizing a macronutrient will never work. Asking consumers to reduce added or free sugar intake could actually be having the opposite effect. Consumers could be more likely to think about added or free sugar at the time of purchase. And this is the exact reason that SMART goals are written in the positive. Current nutrition guidelines have many negative instructions, such as limit, avoid, be mindful, cut down, and eat sparingly. We need to advise people in the positive, encouraging the foods that they should eat rather than avoid. An exact number of teaspoons or tablespoons of healthy fats per meal may be a clearer instruction than limit. When we know how we should fill our plate, could the processed foods fall away? That's been my personal experience and the experience I've had with my clients. It's time to face the reality that the public health messaging of the last 40 years has not worked. We are in the midst of an unfolding crisis of type 2 diabetes, coronary heart disease, and dental caries, and a change is needed. Positive psychology is an emerging area of research in healthcare. Positive nutrition could be a new paradigm. Consumers need to have a clearer message of what they should eat rather than what they should not. Positive messages could include eating more home-cooked meals, choosing foods closer to the way Mother Nature made them, drinking more water, eating plenty of fresh, frozen or canned fruit and vegetables, and sleeping 7 to 9 hours a night. Positive guidelines, the NOVA system and the hormonal carbohydrate level, or a similar measure based on readily available nutritional information, could be a useful tool for the average consumer buying packaged foods. Researchers needed to examine whether this would help improve the quality of diets. It's time to create a new culture, and we need empowered citizens to make changes stick. Public policy documents suggest reducing free or added sugars to around 5 to 6% of total energy intake. And yet the evidence linking free or added sugars to safety are only moderate for dental caries. Sugar-sweetened beverages are linked to an increase in body weight and type 2 diabetes. But it's not clear whether free or added sugars in drinks has the same effect when it's consumed within a food. Refined carbohydrates also raise blood sugars in people with type 2 diabetes, and demonizing sugar confuses this knowledge. Food labeling is inadequate to calculate either added or free sugars, and therefore making public policy about reducing these levels seems unlikely to have significant buy-in. We are searching for one measure instruction to solve this issue, but it's too complex for such a simple solution. If we focus on glycemic index, ice cream could appear to be a healthier choice than watermelon. If we focus on glycemic load, honey could appear to be healthier than brown rice. If we focus on total sugars, a packet of crisps could appear healthier than a banana. We are clearly missing the big picture with any single measure, and yet we know instinctively which was a better choice. We know that foods closer to the way Mother Nature made them is best for us. Future messaging could encourage filling the plate with as much natural or minimally processed food as possible. Front of package labeling could include the NOVA classification and a calculation of hormonal carbohydrate levels, if it's validated. And if we are to improve population health, it is time for a new paradigm. And I would once again like to acknowledge Professor Amanda Avery and the School of Biosciences at the University of Nottingham for all their input and support to develop the content of this webinar. If you would like to contact me, these are my website details and my handle for Instagram and TikTok at Dr. Leah Jacob. And if you would like to subscribe to my YouTube channel to see more videos like this, it's YouTube /@ Dr. Leah Jacob. I deliver a one-on-one fat loss program and a group mindfulness program, so please get in contact if you are interested. And a conflict of interest statement. I'm a director of the company, Dr. Leah Jacob Limited, a lifestyle medicine and health coaching company. And here are some references and more references and a few more pages of these and more. Nearly there. And the last one. Thanks so much for listening.